Marcus Hale always said the Army taught him two things better than anything else: how to move heavy equipment and how to wait patiently for the right moment to strike. Funny thing is, neither of those skills got him in trouble overseas. Nope, it was a suburban HOA in northern Arizona that nearly turned him into a criminal. In the morning, he walked outside barefoot with a cup of coffee in his hand and found 3 concrete barriers blocking his own driveway for the 3rd time that month. That was the exact moment he stopped trying to be reasonable. He stared at those giant gray blocks sitting there like somebody had built a prison gate overnight, steam curling off his coffee into the cold desert air, and under his breath he muttered, "All right, if she wants a war, I'll give her one she'll never forget." Marcus was 53 then, recently divorced, carrying around that quiet kind of exhaustion you only see in people who spent too many years fixing everybody else's problems while their own life quietly fell apart behind them. 22 years in military logistics, 2 deployments, 1 failed marriage, and a son who barely answered his texts anymore. By the time he bought that house in Juniper Ridge Estates, he wasn't chasing luxury or status. He just wanted peace. That was the whole dream. Peace and enough space to run his little cybersecurity consulting business without somebody breathing down his neck every 5 seconds. The house itself wasn't even fancy. Single story, tan stucco, cracked basketball hoop in the driveway from the previous owners, and a big curved pull-through entrance that made it easy for clients to stop by without blocking traffic. That circular driveway was actually what sold him on the property. After years of military bases and apartment parking lots and cramped HOA neighborhoods where people treated parallel parking like blood sport, having space finally felt like freedom. For about 11 days, everything was perfect. Then Evelyn Cross showed up. Now listen, every neighborhood has somebody who thinks they own the place. In Juniper Ridge, that person was Evelyn. Mid-40s, razor-sharp blonde bob, drove a pearl white Range Rover that somehow always looked freshly waxed, even during dust storms. She was HOA president, top real estate agent in the county, and one of those women who smile with her mouth, but never with her eyes. Marcus met her on a Thursday morning while unloading computer monitors from the back of his truck. She didn't knock, didn't wave, didn't even introduce herself. She just walked halfway up his driveway, holding a clipboard against her chest like she was serving a warrant. "You can't park a commercial vehicle here," she said. Marcus looked around, honestly confused at first. Commercial vehicle? The truck. She pointed her pen toward his black Ford F-150. "That violates community standards." Marcus blinked once, then laughed a little because he genuinely thought she was joking. "Mom, half the neighborhood owns trucks. Not one's being used for business operations." Her voice had that syrupy sharpness to it, the kind people use when they enjoy correcting others. "We've received complaints." Marcus rested the monitor on the driveway and squinted at her. "Who's we?" She ignored the question entirely. "Juniper Ridge is a residential community, Mr. Hale. People move here for tranquility, not traffic from random clients coming and going." That was the first moment Marcus felt it. That little flicker under his ribs, the same feeling he used to get around officers who enjoyed humiliating people just because they could. But he kept calm. Years in the Army taught him not to waste energy too early. "I checked every HOA document before buying this place," he said evenly. "Nothing prohibits home-based consulting." Evelyn smiled. "Interpretation matters." Then she turned and walked back to her SUV like she'd just delivered a royal decree. 3 days later, Marcus got his first violation notice. $150. Unauthorized commercial activity. Potential daily penalties pending investigation. He sat at his kitchen table reading it while the microwave hummed behind him, leftover Chinese food growing cold beside stacks of property paperwork. At first, he actually tried to handle it the normal way. He emailed politely, requested clarification, asked for the specific covenant being violated. Evelyn responded 12 hours later with a 3-sentence email that somehow felt smug through the screen. "The board stands by its interpretation." Compliance is expected immediately. That was when Marcus realized this wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about the truck. Evelyn Cross just didn't like him. Maybe because he was divorced. Maybe because he worked from home. Maybe because she hated anybody who didn't fit her perfect little country club version of suburban life. Whatever the reason, she'd picked him as her next project. And unfortunately for her, Marcus Hale had spent 20 years learning how to outlast people exactly like that. The next few weeks turned into a slow-burning psychological war, the kind that eats at you quietly while the rest of the world keeps pretending everything's normal. Marcus would wake up every morning hoping maybe Evelyn had gotten bored. Maybe she'd found somebody else to terrorize. But instead, the violations just kept coming. One for excessive client traffic. Another for visual disruption caused by commercial equipment. Then one because his garbage cans had apparently been visible from the street for 3 extra hours after pickup day. That one actually made him laugh out loud. He stood in his kitchen, reading it while coffee brewed behind him, and just shook his head slowly like, this woman really wakes up every morning looking for reasons to ruin somebody's day. But underneath the humor, the pressure was building. Every fine carried threats. Lien, legal action, daily penalties. And after the divorce had drained most of his savings, Marcus didn't exactly have money to burn fighting suburban dictators in khaki pants. So he started doing what he always did under pressure. He prepared. Security cameras went up first. 4 of them. One covering the driveway, one facing the street, one above the garage, and another aimed toward the side gate where Evelyn liked to casually inspect properties during her evening walks. Then he started reading. HOA law, county ordinances, state property statutes. Every night his kitchen table looked like a law school dropout had suffered a nervous breakdown. And little by little, patterns started emerging. Evelyn wasn't enforcing rules consistently. She was targeting people selectively. The old widow across the street got warnings for wind chimes. A young family down the block got fined because their son's basketball hoop was visually intrusive. One couple had actually removed their backyard vegetable garden after Evelyn threatened legal action over agricultural aesthetics. Marcus started realizing the whole neighborhood lived scared of this woman. Nobody challenged her because everybody assumed they were alone. Then one night around 11:30, the cameras caught something interesting. Marcus had fallen asleep in the recliner watching an old war documentary when his phone buzzed with a motion alert. At first he figured it was a coyote or some neighborhood kid sneaking around. But when he opened the camera feed, he sat up immediately. Evelyn Cross was standing in his driveway, in the dark, measuring it with a tape measure. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. There she was in black yoga pants and a white jacket, crouched near the edge of the concrete like she was investigating a murder scene. Every few seconds she'd write notes on a clipboard, then measure again. No way, Marcus muttered under his breath. He replayed the footage 3 times just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating from lack of sleep. Nope. HOA Queen herself was conducting midnight driveway surveillance like a suburban Batman villain. The next morning, he waited for her. Sure enough, around 8:30, Evelyn appeared strolling down the sidewalk holding her little stainless steel coffee tumbler like she owned the entire zip code. Morning, Marcus called from the driveway. She stopped. That fake polished smile appeared instantly. Marcus! He held up his phone casually. Didn't realize driveway measuring was part of HOA responsibilities now. For one tiny second, her expression cracked. Barely noticeable, but it was there. Excuse me, you were out here around midnight. He tilted the phone toward her, just enough for her to see the paused security footage. Honestly, I'm impressed. Most people commit trespassing during business hours. Evelyn recovered fast, but her jaw tightened hard enough Marcus could see the muscle twitch. I was conducting a community assessment. At midnight, some homeowners require additional oversight. There it was. That tone again, like she wasn't talking to another adult. She was talking to a problem she intended to remove. Marcus leaned against the hood of his truck, and smiled calmly. You know what's funny? I spent 22 years in military logistics. Whole career was basically built around regulations and compliance. And for what I've read, you're violating about 6 HOA procedures yourself. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Careful, Marcus. No, he said softly. I think you should be careful. For the first time since moving into Juniper Ridge, he saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Not fear exactly, more like irritation that prey wasn't behaving correctly. 2 days later, she retaliated. Hard. Marcus walked outside before sunrise for a client appointment and froze halfway down the driveway. His truck was gone. At first, he honestly thought it had been stolen. Then he saw the fluorescent orange sticker slapped across his garage door. Vehicle removed due to HOA enforcement action. He just stood there in silence, cold air biting through his t-shirt while anger crawled slowly up the back of his neck. They had towed his truck from his own driveway. By the time he got to the impound lot, he was shaking so badly the cashier thought he might pass out. $380 cash. No payment plans. No exceptions. Take it up with your HOA, the guy behind the counter said with a shrug. Marcus drove home, gripping the steering wheel hard, enough his knuckles turned white. And that was the moment something shifted inside him. Because until then, some part of him still believed this was misunderstanding. Pet di Juan nonsense. Annoying, but temporary. But towing his vehicle from private property? That wasn't enforcement anymore. That was humiliation. Intimidation. Evelyn wanted him financially cornered, emotionally exhausted, isolated enough to eventually leave the neighborhood altogether. Same strategy bullies always use. Make resistance feel more painful than surrender. What she didn't realize was Marcus had spent most of his adult life around people who weaponized pressure. And pressure only worked when the other person still cared about avoiding conflict. By that evening, half the neighborhood already knew what happened. An older woman named Lorraine Bennett knocked on his door, carrying a casserole dish and enough righteous anger to light a small city. She did the same thing to my nephew, she said quietly after Marcus invited her inside. Different reason, same tactics. Then the stories started pouring out. Families she'd threatened. Elderly couples she'd harassed. Kids she'd made cry over chalk drawings and bicycles left on sidewalks. One by one, people started admitting something they'd all been too embarrassed to say out loud before. Evelyn Cross wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was terrorizing it. And sitting there at his kitchen table, listening to those stories while untouched casserole cooled between them. Marcus finally understood something important. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It belonged to the whole neighborhood now. What happened over the next month still feels unreal when I think about it now. Like one of those stories people swear must be exaggerated until you show them the receipts. Because once the neighborhood stopped being afraid of Evelyn Cross, her whole little empire started cracking apart faster than anybody expected. And honestly, the craziest part wasn't the legal threats or the screaming matches or even the public humiliation later on. It was watching people slowly remember they actually had power. Marcus started organizing quietly at first. Nothing dramatic. Just conversations. Coffee on porches. Late-night talks in driveways. Neighbors comparing violation letters like trading war stories nobody wanted to admit they had. And every single conversation uncovered something uglier. The Ramirez family had paid over $4,000 in fines because Evelyn claimed their work van lowered property values. A retired teacher named Glenn Harper got threatened with legal action after installing a wheelchair ramp for his wife. One teenager had his drum set confiscated during a neighborhood inspection because Evelyn called it potential noise equipment. The woman wasn't enforcing rules anymore. She was feeding on control, and the more Marcus listened, the more personal it became. Because under all the anger and legal nonsense, what Evelyn really stole from people was comfort. She made everybody feel watched all the time, judged, unsafe in their own homes. That kind of stress changes people. You stop planting flowers because somebody might complain. You stop inviting family over because extra cars might trigger fines. You start peeking through blinds before putting your trash bins out like you're living under surveillance in some weird suburban dictatorship. Marcus knew that feeling well. The military had taught him something dangerous about human behavior. People can tolerate almost anything if you convince them resistance is hopeless. So instead of fighting Evelyn alone, he started giving the neighborhood information. State statutes, financial records, meeting procedures. And once people understood how much authority she didn't legally have, the fear started disappearing. That was when Evelyn made her fatal mistake. She panicked. One Friday night, Marcus was sitting in his garage with Glenn Harper sharing a couple beers when his phone buzzed with another camera notification. He opened the feed and frowned. Evelyn's Range Rover was parked across the street again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Two men in suits stood beside her near the sidewalk, pointing toward Marcus's driveway while she talked rapidly with exaggerated hand gestures. "What you doing now?" Glenn asked. Marcus zoomed the image closer, then suddenly sat upright. No way. One of the men was a city code inspector. By 10 the next morning, Evelyn had emergency notices taped across Marcus's property claiming the circular driveway violated drainage compliance and posed potential structural hazards. Marcus actually laughed when he read it because the whole thing was so desperate it bordered on parody. The driveway had existed for 16 years before he bought the house. Same exact concrete, same exact grading. But suddenly, after months of personal warfare, it was now a public safety concern. Frank Donovan, the retired attorney who lived 3 houses down, laughed even harder. "She's spiraling," he said while adjusting his reading glasses. "And desperate people make sloppy mistakes." Then he showed Marcus something beautiful. Evelyn Cross had been serving as HOA president illegally for almost 2 years. Marcus stared across the kitchen table while Frank slid over printed county records and unpaid assessment notices. "Wait," Marcus blinked. "She owes the HOA money, $8,642. Frank tapped the paperwork calmly. According to Arizona state law, delinquent members cannot legally serve on HOA boards. Marcus leaned back slowly, stunned silent for a moment. Every fine, every violation, every towing action, potentially unenforceable. Evelyn had spent years terrorizing people with authority she technically never even had. And somehow, that wasn't even the best part. The best part came 3 weeks later during the emergency HOA meeting Evelyn herself scheduled to restore order in the community. Marcus still remembers walking into that clubhouse and feeling the energy immediately. Something had changed. Usually people sat quietly during HOA meetings, eyes down, eager to leave. Not this time. Every chair was filled. Neighbors lined the walls. Couples whispered angrily to each other, while stacks of printed evidence sat on laps across the room. And up front, behind the long folding table, Evelyn Cross looked exhausted. Not physically, spiritually exhausted. Like somebody trying desperately to hold together a life already collapsing underneath them. But she still tried. God, she tried. She launched into a whole speech about protecting neighborhood standards and maintaining property values, voice sharp and rehearsed, but nobody was buying it anymore. You could feel the room turning against her sentence by sentence. Then Marcus stood up, quietly, calmly. And for the first time since moving into Juniper Ridge, he didn't feel angry anymore. Just clear. "You know," he said, looking around the room instead of at Evelyn, "for a long time I thought this was about rules." The room went silent. Then I thought maybe it was personal. Maybe she just didn't like me. He paused, but it was never really about me. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably behind the table. Marcus continued. This was about fear. Because if people are scared enough, they stop asking questions. Then Frank stood beside him and placed the financial records directly on the front table. You could actually hear people inhaling sharply around the room. Evelyn's face drained white. According to county records, Frank said evenly, Mrs. Cross has been legally disqualified from HOA leadership due to unpaid assessments since March of last year. Absolute silence. The kind that feels heavy in your chest. Then chaos. Questions exploded everywhere. People yelling. Somebody in the back shouted, "You fined us while you owed money yourself?" Another woman started crying. One older man slammed his hand against the wall hard enough to rattle a framed community photo. And through all of it, Evelyn just sat there frozen. Not angry anymore. Not powerful. Just exposed. Human. Small even. Marcus remembers looking at her and realizing something strange. Bullies always seem enormous until the moment people stop fearing them. Then suddenly they look exactly what they are. Just insecure people trying to control everybody else before life exposes their own cracks. Evelyn resigned the following Monday. House went on the market 2 weeks later. Nobody even waved goodbye when the moving trucks came. And weirdly enough, that wasn't the satisfying part. The satisfying part came later. Kids riding bikes again without parents panicking about complaints. Backyard barbecues returning. People planting gardens. Laughing louder. Existing comfortably. Peace came back slowly, like a neighborhood recovering from a long illness. 3 years later, Marcus still lives there. Same driveway. Same truck. Same house. Only difference is now there are giant stone planters lining the entrance. Heavy enough nobody's ever blocking that driveway again. Sometimes new neighbors ask why they're there, and Marcus just smiles into his coffee and says, "Long story." But honestly, he still thinks about Evelyn sometimes. About how power changes people when nobody pushes back. About how communities fall apart when fear becomes normal. And maybe that's the real reason he tells this story now. Not because he won some war against an HOA president, but because somewhere out there, somebody's probably sitting in their own kitchen right now, feeling trapped by somebody exactly like her. If that's you, trust me, you're not as powerless as they want you to believe. And honestly, I gotta ask, if somebody abused authority like that in your neighborhood, how far would you go to fight back? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you risk becoming the villain in somebody else's story just to stop a bully? Let me know in the comments, because people get real divided on this one.